Rebels in Syria are joining forces, and that could mean the country's ruler might be losing power. In recent weeks, Syrian rebels have captured the cities of Idlib and Jazir al-Shugur, as well as a military base al-Karmid. They are also threatening a coastal province that is considered a stronghold of President Bashar al-Assad. Now, the Assad family has been in power, as many of you know, in Syria since 1970. Now, 4 years into the civil war, they seem to be on shakier ground. Well, Charles Goldberg is an international security policy analyst. Charles, welcome to Arise Review.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Could we possibly be seeing here a radical shift and change in power in Syria?
I think it might be the beginning, but I think it's way too soon to know for sure. And the reason for that is Iran has extremely large stake in Syria and propping up this regime because it's the conduit for arms for their client in Lebanon, Hezbollah. And therefore, they've brought Hezbollah fighters as well as Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders to advise and to help the Syrian army and Bashar Assad retain power. And they've been doing this at the cost of $1 to $2 billion a month, which is actually about as much as they spend on their own military. So
that's amazing.
It's a huge outlay of money and of men and of effort to try to keep this regime in power. And I don't think they're going to give it up quickly.
Probably, no one wants to give up power that much, especially when you've had it for such a long time. Lay out for us, if you will, the geopolitical landscape of that area, and also as it relates to the U.S., because it's kind of a mangled mess there if you go back.
There are really three sides to this, geopolitical sides to this story. Of course, you have Iran on one side. It's fighting in Yemen. It's helping fight the fight in Yemen. It's fighting in Syria. It's fighting in Iraq, and it's supporting proxies in all these countries. Obviously, Hezbollah in Lebanon is its main proxy. It's really an arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and their interest is in some sort of Shia crescent, if you will, that stretches from Yemen through Iran and Iraq to Syria and Lebanon. Now, you have also on the other side, you have the Saudis. The Saudis and the other Gulf states and Egypt and the Israelis are obviously opposed to this, and they view their main threat as Iran and Hezbollah. They don't view Al-Qaeda or the ISIS as the main threat. They view that more as a nuisance, if you will. Obviously, they're dangerous terrorists.
Sure.
But as an existential, long-term strategic threat, Iran and Hezbollah are the main threat to the Saudis and the Iranians, the Saudis, the Israelis, and the Egyptians. And then in the United States, on the other hand, is coming at this kind of trying to balance out its policy of support for the Saudis, its traditional support for the Saudis, by negotiating a nuclear deal with Iran. And the United States has been very lukewarm in its support of the rebels. They do support the rebels, they do support the overthrow of the Assad regime, but they're not doing much to help. And recently, the Saudis, Turkey, and Qatar have come together and created what's called the Army of Conquest, which is like a new coalition of moderate Islamists, if you want to call them that, and FSA, Free Syrian Army fighters who are more secular.
I'm going to start calling you professor now because you've laid it out. But what you've outlaid here is a very difficult situation, and I think difficult more than the New York Times crossword puzzle on Sundays. The issue here that compounds this also more, Charles, is the fact that you have all these rebel groups in Syria. You have about some estimates of 40 rebel groups there. I guess the question is, if the United States and others are interested in overthrowing Bashar al-Assad, who gets into power? Who do you support? How do you make the situation any better than what it is now? Or could it possibly get worse?
Well, I think it could get worse because Al-Qaeda's organization called the Al-Nusra Front has taken the lead in fighting Bashar Assad. And the Saudis have encouraged, perhaps, and certainly have allowed their less, let's say, more moderate Islamist fighters to cooperate and work with the Al-Nusra Front. And the United States, of course, is opposed to this. So there's a fracture between the U.S. and the Saudis over how to deal with Syria. And I think the only way to really overthrow Assad right now, realistically, there are two options. I think one is to support these Al-Nusra Front Al-Qaeda terrorists, which of course we don't want to do.
Right.
But I think a more practical option, and I've heard this from senior defense officials in the region, I can't name which country, but
oh, come on,
because it was off the record. But just in general, I'm not going to obviously get into the details, but just in general, the Turks have proposed a plan of creating a no-fly zone and a safe area in the north of Syria. If the United States were to buy into that, which they haven't yet, and there's been differences between the United States and Turkey over how to implement this, the U.S. keeps saying no. But if the United States Air Force was to buy into this plan, it would require really taking out the Syrian Air Force and air defense. And that would allow the Turks into the north to fight both ISIS and the regime. And that's a good way to perhaps get rid of the regime without empowering the Islamists.
3 words: one hot mess.
Absolutely.
And it's not going to get any easier as we go along. But I want to thank you so much for giving us a historical perspective on all this and some more insight. Hopefully we'll see you again.
I hope so. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Coming up next, America loses ground in an important ranking. You're watching a Rise review. Stay with us.